by his speeches, but indirectly through the mass media. Anthony DiMaggio's new book, Selling Fear, Selling Hope, examines presidential successes and failures from the war on terror, quote unquote, through the Arab Spring. He finds that presidents succeed twice as often as they failed in the last decade in selling interventions. Case studies examined in this presentation include the Iraq War, the rhetorical conflict with Iran, 2002 to present, the Afghanistan War, the Egyptian Revolution, 2011 to present, Syrian Civil War, 2011 till now, the Libyan Civil War, 2011, and the Benghazi terrorist attack, 2012. Anthony DiMaggio also examines the decline of presidential power over the last few years in manufacturing consent, as explored in the examples of the Afghanistan War, the Libyan Civil War, and the Syrian conflict. While presidents are overwhelmingly powerful in manipulating public consciousness, there remains hope for the future in terms of the public increasingly challenging presidential rhetoric and propaganda about Anthony. Anthony DiMaggio holds a PhD in political science from the University of Illinois, Chicago. He has taught American government and global politics at a number of colleges and universities, and is the author of numerous books, including Mass Media, Mass Propaganda, 2008, When Media Goes to War, 2010, Crashing the Tea Party, 2011, The Rise of the Tea Party, 2011. He recently completed a book on Selling Fear, Selling Hope, Presidential Rhetoric in U.S. Foreign Policy, 2001-2013, which he'll talk about a little today. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Anthony DiMaggio.
Thanks for the introduction, Peter. I just want to thank everybody for coming out today. Is this a good volume?
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay. So the presentation has to do with the recent research I've been doing, which, to be honest, is kind of a culmination of everything I've been doing for the last 10 years, bringing it up to date with modern events, particularly the whole Benghazi incident and the proposed war in Syria. So I've become interested in presidential rhetoric. It's kind of pretty strongly related to my interest in media stuff, because you've got somebody making the message and then it gets disseminated. So I historically been pretty interested in this whole idea of manufacturing consent. Obviously, we know where that comes from the Herman Chomsky book. But it's interesting in the book, there's always something that kind of bothered me. They don't ever look at if it's effective. It's just, here's some content. And so do political leaders actually succeed, and when do they succeed, and when don't they? And what could that actually tell us about improving our democracy? What prospects there are for that. Now, this is really an open question, whether they succeed or not, because maybe people read this stuff and they hear about presidential rhetoric in the news, and maybe they just care about Miley Cyrus and twerking, or whatever the issue is. Whatever maybe they're not paying attention at all. Maybe people are just doing other things. So it's not entirely clear right away how much of an effect this rhetoric actually has, and that's kind of something I wanted to look at. So do they succeed? In the book, I talk not just about this idea of manufacturing consent, but the words I use most often in the book come out of sociology, social construction. So there's this idea in political science, and I don't agree with it, but it comes out of public policy studies where people say, what is public policy? Oh, it's a bunch of political leaders. They get together and they come up with a solution to some problem everybody recognizes as an issue. And isn't that nice? People come up with solutions to these problems that are objectively recognized. And, that's really not how reality works. Reality is about coming up with narratives. I say something's an issue, and then I convince people that there's a problem, which may not even be a problem. We've learned in foreign policy, when you talk about weapons of mass destruction and supposed ties to Al-Qaeda with the Iraq War. So really, that's not how it works. Really, it's about constructing messages and seeing if you can get people to buy into them. So that's where social construction comes in. It's really just kind of a synonym, as far as I'm concerned, for manufacturing consent. You construct attitudes. You manipulate attitudes. You create them. So this is something that comes out of political science, this idea of, well, we're just solving problems. That's not accurate. And there's also a number of other problems in my discipline, which I'm happy to air the dirty laundry for now. One is this idea that presidents are impotent. This is like a really common idea amongst people who teach the young, professors. They say presidents, they don't succeed, they don't have power. People, the only people who care about this stuff is people who are already partisans for that party. So, a Republican leader talks and Republicans listen, and Obama talks and Democrats listen, but most people don't care. This stuff doesn't influence anybody. And there's also this idea that the media are pretty weak. People come into it already with their own ideas, and then everybody thinks the media are biased today, so people just kind of brush off content, and they're not really that influenced by propaganda in the media and manipulation. And none of those things are true, by the way. Presidents are extremely powerful at manipulating minds. And the media are where people get almost all of their information today. So you can go and talk to your friends about things, but to the extent that anyone's paying attention to an issue, they're getting their information from the media. We're more mediated as a society today than ever before. So I guess what I'm saying is we have fundamental problems with mainstream academia. It's just not very good at describing reality. So that's some of the stuff I've been trying to deal with here. The theme from this book, the big theme when I say selling fear, selling hope, is that this is how you get people to go along. Traditionally, after 9/11, selling fear, the whole war on terrorism. I looked at these case studies that Peter had mentioned. And the first thing you do is you have to scare the living hell out of people. And that's how they're going to become submissive. And then you have to sell them on hope. The hope that you as the president are the one person who can effectively protect them from all of these foreign threats, a lot of which end up being phantom threats, as we've seen in recent years. And I argue in the book, presidents succeed about twice as often as they fail, which means they don't get what they want all the time. And that's actually the optimistic part at the end of this presentation. They succeed about twice as often as they fail. The successes I talk about in the book: Afghanistan in 2001, the Iraq War in 2003. Basically, any time Iran has been framed in the news and come up in the last 12 years with regards to this issue of nuclear weapons and supposed nuclear weapons. The Afghanistan surge, 2009. The intervention in Libya just 2 years ago in 2011. The way the Obama administration framed its response to the Egyptian revolution in 2011. All of these are examples of pretty smashing presidential successes in terms of dominating the national narrative and getting what you want out. Now, there are some big failures too, and these are the things I think in hindsight are the most interesting in the last few years, because there really have been some huge changes recently. The Iraq War in the long term, not the beginning, but between 2003 to 2011 was a pretty large failure for the Bush administration. The Obama administration, the response to the whole Benghazi incident in 2012, and probably the most important of all recently would be the proposed Syria intervention. These are some really interesting things that have been happening that really represent big failures on the part of our president to dominate messages and to dominate American thinking. Past research on the presidency says people don't even pay attention to speeches, so how would people even know what the president's saying? Well, that's true. Most people aren't paying close attention to a president when he goes out and gives a bunch of speeches. But the stuff gets covered in the media later, so that's really the key. I think this is probably the reason why political science scholarship, one of them, has been so bad. They have these very narrow, esoteric questions. How many people pay attention to a speech, and then they find not many, and then they just throw the whole thing out? So presidents they can't do anything. It's like, well, that's not really how reality works. Things are mediated. You can't just look at speeches, you have to look at actual attention to news reporting. Now, the optimism here, although I said presidents succeed twice as often as they fail, the optimism is we're really seeing a revolution in the last, I would say, 2 to 4 years in terms of people in general just becoming a lot more skeptical of what they hear from political leaders. And that really wasn't the case for most of post 9/11 history. It really started happening about 4 years ago, and we really saw for the first big time the public come together proactively in the last year and actually prevent an intervention before it happened. So these are the things that I think are really interesting. I'm going to spend a little time going over the successes first. Not a lot of time, because these are things that everybody knows about that we've studied before. And I do talk about them in the book. It's kind of a setup for later chapters. But Afghanistan, after 9/11, obviously you have Most Americans very scared, understandably, about the threat of terrorism. They really didn't need much convincing. But if you look at the research out there, you find that the president, through the mass media, was pretty effective at taking a public that was already supportive of war and making them even more supportive. The research that was done said that it was kind of interesting after 9/11. Well, there were two ways you could have framed it. It could have been framed as a law and order thing. Okay, we have a crime and we could catch the people, present evidence, and do it that way. Or we could just have the war framework. And obviously we know which one of those two took over in the mass media. It was not the law and order framework, despite the fact that there are all types of concerns about human rights and humanitarian issues and bombing and civilians getting caught up in the bombing. And this little inconvenient fact that obviously Al-Qaeda radicals are not going to wait around for bombs to drop on their heads, so they just kind of left before the bombing even started. And it really just dispersed the network. It didn't take it down, just dispersed it. None of these questions really came up prior to the war, of course. And people who pay a lot of attention to news on the proposed Afghanistan war and presidential rhetoric, they were much more supportive. Now, people are already supportive, though. And this kind of starts to fade after 9/11. You have overwhelming support from Americans, like 70, 80, 85% of Americans were taking military action. By the time of the Iraq War, less than 2 years later, still really strong support, but people are starting to need to be cajoled. They're starting to, well, you're 2 years in, still strong support, but the president's going to have to do some real work here. And this was actually quite controversial early on, because if you take a close look at the research and the way that the media content was being disseminated and what was happening in late 2002, this was not actually a slam dunk for Bush. People in hindsight say, well, the media rolled over. They did in the end. But in late 2002, there was a lot of reporting about this whole congressional debate about war. You had Democrats asking questions about how long were we going to be there, what was the cost going to be. Most of it was pretty procedural stuff, nothing too substantive. Every once in a while, some substantive claims would come up. But Americans weren't just automatically strongly in favor of that war. The president had to undertake a campaign for months and months and months to sell this thing. And he really wasn't succeeding in late 2002. There really wasn't much evidence that this was going anywhere. It wasn't until the bill was passed by Congress and the opposition was removed from Democrats by January that he really started succeeding in selling people. That is the point where you really started seeing not just a lot of speeches. He was doing a lot before January 2003, but a lot of speeches that are actually working in terms of convincing people. But it's so soon after 9/11, so you have that's still in people's minds. You still have this very important landmark event in American history that, in addition to presidential rhetoric, is very convincing at selling people on war. And the big themes, obviously, we know: weapons of mass destruction, terrorism. And this becomes an issue later on. It becomes a big issue because you're fostering the seeds for long-term dissent after this invasion for obvious reasons. There were no weapons. There were no ties to Al-Qaeda, and that's not the end of it. You go into this occupation, the Bush administration declares in May of 2003, with this huge sign behind the president off the coast of California, "Mission accomplished," except for we'll be there another 8 years. So talk about premature endings. You promised these things, and there was overwhelming support in 2003 for war by the time it began. Something like 2/3 to 3/4 of Americans, and then, a huge amount of Americans, and then you start to see this long slide, because there starts to be this discrepancy between presidential rhetoric and reality, not just something you uncover later on through investigation and reports, and we actually have to go into Iraq and do all these inspections and prove thoroughly that there weren't weapons. That's stuff that requires research projects and huge amounts of study on the part of Congress. Something starts happening between 2003 and 2011 that is just really blatant. Anyone can see it. And that's this huge growth in violence and casualties. And this really, I would say, you start to see the beginning of the end for presidents in terms of their ability to just manipulate people at will. 9/11 really was a gift for U.S. political leaders, not in a conspiratorial way, in the sense that they obviously had long-standing agendas, the Bush administration. They wanted to go into Iraq, and this provided them the way to do it. And we're talking now 12 years out. This is a memory for many young Americans and even people into their 20s and 30s. And it's something that increasingly every year is further and further away. And the power of this is really kind of diminished in people's minds in terms of the ability to manipulate thoughts. So in the case of in the case study of Iran, this is something I've done a lot to talk about in recent years. There still is this power to create fear. If you look at reporting of Iran during the Bush years, during the Obama years, there's been this overwhelming consensus amongst political leaders. Well, they definitely have nuclear weapons. Well, that's not true. In terms of the evidence we do have, there was a national intelligence estimate in 2007. There was one in 2010. They said, we conclude with high confidence that they stopped developing nuclear weapons 10 years ago. This was back in 2003 compared to today, 10 years ago. And yet, if you look at the rhetoric, it's interesting. I was doing the research on this and I was updating it. Every 6 months or so, you see a news story from the Washington Post or CNN or the New York Times, and it says, Iran is on the brink. They're on the brink. And I looked at what's on the brink, because you should always look up the meaning of words just to make sure, because usually if you have a question, you're being manipulated. So on the brink means obviously, but I just wanted to double check. It's going to happen right now. On the brink. So how can something be on the brink for 10 years? Kind of makes a mockery of the term, doesn't it? It's perpetually on the brink. Every 6 months, they're on the brink, and then it doesn't happen. And then 6 months later, they say it again. And, the coverage is dominated by this kind of fearful rhetoric. And if you look at public opinion polls, people actually pay attention to this stuff. They find it very convincing, most Americans. So there still is this power to this day to kind of manufacture fear and consent. But as of 2000, I would say during the 2000s, but really by the late 2000s, we've really seen a huge shift. There really is something that gives me at least some optimism. Now, I don't know, I guess, on the left, we're not allowed to be optimists a lot of the time. We always have to find fault, which is a good thing. But at some point, there's got to be some reason to be optimistic, or I don't know why we're all here, why we're doing these things. And that's what I want to talk about now. I would say that the seeds of this, I mentioned 2009, that's really an important year because you have the Obama administration, they want to sell a surge in Afghanistan. They want to have 100,000 troops in Afghanistan. Not a popular war, by the way, at that point. You can see a big growth in opposition during early to mid-2009. The reason's pretty obvious. Growing violence and growing American casualties. You can actually see it. It's like there's a very strong correlation there between growth in opposition and growth in coverage of casualties. Who knew people don't like long, bloody wars? Well, people don't. And I think we're getting to the point now where there's this critical mass that's being reached. And we started seeing it during the late Bush years in Iraq, where by 2005, 2006, 2007, a majority of Americans then said that not only did they think the war was a mistake, but they wanted out, and even that the war was immoral. And then it really entered center stage with Afghanistan in 2009, because you had a president who did something that had never been done in American history, as far as I can tell, and he announced an escalation of a war while simultaneously announcing his drawdown plan. He said, okay, we're going in, we're going to have 100,000 troops, and by the way, here's the plan for getting out. We'll be drawing down troops by 2011. Now, I don't know that that made anybody who is a critic of war say, wow, we're so much better than we've been. Well, you still fight the war with 100,000, but at least the president says there might be an ending. And that was something Bush wouldn't do. So I don't know that you'd want to pat yourself on the back for that one, the anti-war movement or anything, but the reason why I talk about it is because it was probably the beginning of something that was starting to happen. There was a recognition on the part of the president that people were really getting tired of these wars, and you had to at least give lip service to drawing down conflicts. Now, I don't think that that's acceptable as a standard for our foreign policy, and I think most people on the left wouldn't either. But it is an important moment in terms of moving into the future. So the president did succeed. He had turned around an increasingly critical public by late 2009, giving speeches, media coverage, continuously, stories on Afghanistan growing in number and associating Afghanistan with terrorism and the need to fight terrorism. And this is really a controversial thing if you think about it, because there were internal reports from the Obama administration itself in mid-2009 saying, we estimate something like 100 al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. Well, that's an interesting ratio, don't you think? 100,000 troops are needed for 100 people. And there were real questions about what this was. And you had reporters like Christian Parenti from The Nation saying, well, this is a president who doesn't want to be accused of losing 2 wars at the same time. We're getting out of Iraq, so we're gonna spend some time in Afghanistan, pump up some troops, claim progress, and then get out. And he could be the guy who wouldn't be framed as soft on terrorism and when it came to war, so he could out-Republican the Republicans. And he did, and it was successful, and there was this very significant growth in public support by late 2009. It was going the opposite direction for the whole year, and it really turns around by the end of the year. 2 big things helped that. 1, the media content and drumming up support. 2, very convenient for the president, there's a decline in U.S. casualties by the end of 2009, so now that's out of the news. And he's got these 2 things coming together at once, and they allow him to really build up this support. But really what we've been seeing since then, and even before then a little bit, is this huge change that I wanted to talk about. If you look at the Iraq War, why did opposition grow? Well, you can see it statistically. I document it in the book. There's basically a 1-to-1 correlation between fluctuations in coverage of violence in Iraq and fluctuations in public support and opposition. They really move nicely and beautifully together. As a social scientist, you'd say, wow, that's clearly what's doing this. Clearly, people are paying attention to growing U.S. casualties and violence. Statistically, you could see in surveys, the plurality of Americans knew what the casualty count was at any given time. The largest number of Americans out of all the categories that they gave, how many Americans have died at any given time? 1,000, 2,000, 3,000. Plurality of Americans, and in some surveys even a majority, knew. Not only did they know, there was a very strong relationship between knowing and being more likely to oppose the war. Something by like 20 percentage points. You were more likely to support withdrawal if you knew the right number. So clearly, there was a group of people, and it was growing, who were becoming disenchanted with this thing. The question would be, what was the main reason? Generically, yes, violence was going up. People didn't like it. But this has been a discussion in the scholarly community for a while. There's at least 3 different reasons people have given for why is it that people turn against wars? Just the important thing we're getting into now. One thing historically, a really popular explanation is the warmonger explanation. There's a lot of mainstream academics, I don't even know if they're mainstream, I might even say reactionary, who say, people get pissed when you put a lot of resources into a conflict and the perception is we're not winning. So we're just a nation of warmongers, really, who get angry when we don't win. It's not a very flattering portrayal of Americans. Might be true, but that's one of the explanations for why people turn against wars. Another reason is because people are sheep. Because at some point, the Democratic Party turned against this war, they thought it wasn't going well, and then Democrats followed like sheep. And that's why you have this growth in opposition. Third explanation is just simply casualties. People don't like seeing lots of Americans get killed in growing numbers. And a fourth explanation, which has literally never been talked about until this book in academia, is, wow, maybe there's a moral opposition to war. Who would have ever thought that morally people might not like watching people get killed and violence and destruction? And that's something I really wanted to look into this, for this book, because it's never been looked at. Activists have talked about it, that there's moral opposition in the anti-war movement, but what about on the American public level more generally? So what I did statistically is you can actually go find the surveys where they ask people about their level of partisanship. Are they a Democrat or Republican? They ask them if they think that a war is unwinnable or not. You think it's not going to be a success or it's unwinnable? Do you know about the level of casualties in Iraq? Do you think the war is immoral or morally justified? You can go find those surveys. They've never been looked at yet. You can compare these reasons. And what I found in the book was all of the reasons explain opposition. All of them do, but some are much better than others. Some are much better than others. The most important explanation, which no one has ever seemed interested in talking about, is immorality. That's the single strongest reason. Now, you never see it in the mass media. When you see editorials in the New York Times or the LA Times, the Washington Post, during the Iraq War, to the extent that people were turning against the war in later years, they said things like, it's costing too much money, it's making us look bad, we're not going to win, we should get out because it's a quagmire. And that's not the main reason why Americans were opposed. They were opposed because of the perception of immorality. That was the strongest reason. Perceptions of success were a secondary reason. They were pretty significant. Was the war winnable or not? But not as strong as morality-based reasons. Those other things, political parties, casualty awareness, those were important too, but on a secondary level. This is, I think, an important finding worth stressing going into the future, because I'm not going to characterize Americans primarily as the nation of warmongers who get mad that we lose. I think the primary reason, and the data suggested this, is moral concerns. And that's actually very good going into the future, because it has implications for future conflicts. The Iraq War was happening. The Bush administration didn't care what people thought. Obviously, if you lived through those years, it was really obvious they could have cared less. He paid the price in terms of his legacy. Now, that's not the same as punishing someone for war crimes or lying, but if you look at his legacy, he did leave office with the lowest approval rating in post-World War II history. The lowest rating was like 23% by early 2009. This has had profound implications for the Obama administration going through, because they have really been reluctantly limited in terms of what they've been able to do. Not as much at first. At first they were able to do all types of things, and there's this idea when a president gets elected, the honeymoon. It's like a honeymoon in a normal relationship, assuming you have a normal relationship. You get married, honeymoon is vacation time. The president, like with the honeymoon, has a lot of ability to get through all types of things in the first year, maybe 2 years of his presidency, that he really doesn't later on. So there was a lot of stuff early on Obama was able to sell people on. Civil war in Libya. The claim was humanitarianism, right? You have a dictator, Muammar Gaddafi, he's going to kill people. I wouldn't deny that there might have been a humanitarian component to that conflict, in the sense that if you have an intervention and you defeat a dictator and he can't kill a bunch of people he was going to kill, those people are now alive, whereas they weren't before. Does that mean that that's why we were there? Well, there are real questions about that, because there's all types of nasty dictators throughout the world, and we don't say anything about them. In fact, we support a lot of them. In Egypt, or Saudi Arabia, or Bahrain, or in plenty of other countries, you have repressive governments. So there are real questions about this conflict. There might have been a humanitarian consequence or effect, but that doesn't mean it was the motivation. And I talk about in the book the very real evidence, there's a lot of evidence, that this is more of the same. You have a Middle East, which has the lion's share of the oil throughout the world. Libya is very much a part of that on the periphery. They're only about 2% of world oil. But Spain and Italy get a massive amount of their oil from there, and in the interconnected, globalized world, we're connected to Europe, so this is supply disruptions, and 2% is important, even if it's 2%. It's high-quality oil, and it's not just that, Libya and oil, it's a regional thing. That's how U.S. presidents historically look at policy planning. Libya is part of a larger region that we need to have control over. And in this case, you have a president who's never really been much of a U.S. ally. In fact, was an enemy for much of his history. And people are rising up, and this is a really good opportunity Obama sees for asserting U.S. power. He succeeds in selling it as a humanitarian intervention. People buy into it. The media coverage is overwhelmingly dominated by the president. The humanitarian rhetoric is in the forefront. But there's an interesting twist with Libya. The president is able to sell this thing quickly because you have Gaddafi moving quickly towards rebel encampments, and there's this idea that we have to act quickly or otherwise, you know, these people will get wiped out. And the American public goes along begrudgingly. If you look at the early surveys, people will say, hell no, another war? This is terrible. And then he says, well, look what's going to happen, and we got to act now. And people say, okay, if American troops are in harm's way, maybe we'll agree to a limited intervention. Here's what we're going to do. We will agree to a bombing campaign, no troops on the ground. And there's just no support for that at all. This is a new era we're entering into with Libya, where the president says, okay, good enough. Bombing campaign, NATO, we assert ourselves. And then, you know, in the future, we'll try and do that again and again and again. Despite the fact that and when we talk about Egypt, this is another case study I look at. Despite the fact that the fall of the Mubarak regime is a huge failure for the United States. It's a huge failure because we have a preferred dictator ally who gets overthrown. And there's a lot of uncertainty about who's going to take over. Islamist leaders, Muslim Brotherhood. This is something the U.S. doesn't want to entertain and kind of gets forced into doing. Despite the fact that this is a huge failure on the part of the president, he somehow manages to spin this after the fact. And if you look at the coverage, it's like, okay, we favor Mubarak, Mubarak, Mubarak till the day before the collapse. And then the narrative changes. And it's, we've always favored democracy. And of course, the president the whole time, even before Mubarak is overthrown, has been giving lip service to the rhetoric of democracy. And then he changes the narrative at the last minute. And then the revolution happens, and there's massive amounts of coverage, and then everyone starts paying attention because that's the big watershed moment. And then you're hearing Obama at that moment dominating the coverage. Oh, see, this is part of our vision. No, yeah, that's part of your vision. Bringing in the Muslim Brotherhood is part of your vision and getting rid of your ally. And somehow he manages to spin this one beautifully at the last minute, where if you look at the people who are paying attention, they're like, yeah, this is the democracy narrative. Obama did a good job here. It's like, wow, that's a real victory for propaganda and spin. But I think, you know, really this last event in Syria, we've really kind of really turned 180 degrees here. You had, after 9/11, an extremely reactionary, warlike culture in the United States where the president could have sold anything, put a bow on it and sold it, and people would have gone into it. And now, 12 years later, it's really kind of the opposite. This is really a historic moment. And I'm happy to say I was wrong about it, by the way. I wrote an article in Counterpunch saying, well, historically, we really don't have any reason to be that optimistic here, because you look at almost every single other instance. You've got growing opposition, sure, in the case of Afghanistan and limited support in Libya and so on, but really nothing to suggest that the president's going to lose here. Here's what's going to happen, I said. The president's going to roll out his propaganda campaign. He's going to talk about chemical weapons, despite the fact that there isn't actually any evidence that's been shared with anyone yet that there were chemical weapons used, at least on the part of the regime. Now, were there? Weren't there? It seemed like everybody just kind of assumed there were. I'm not saying that they weren't used by the government. I'm not saying they were. I'm saying that if you're going to go to war, you probably should have some actual evidence that you share with people. And the Obama administration, being as cavalier as they were and arrogant, they did it the opposite. They said, let's get the bill voted on first before I make the case, and Congress will just go along, and Americans will go along, and I'll sell it once I get authorization. And he said, let's get the authorization, then I'll make the case, which was a big mistake because I guess he forgot there were a lot of rabid Tea Partiers and other Republicans in Congress who were howling for his blood on anything. You look at any policy he proposes, doesn't matter if they support it, they're against it once he's in favor of it. Healthcare reform was a Republican idea. Now it's his idea. Well, we hate it. Debt reduction. Let's cut $4 trillion out of the next 10 years out of the budget. 3 of every $4 of savings will come from cutting spending rather than raising revenues. This is a Republican dream. We hate it because Obama's in favor of it. War in Syria. Well, if Bush sold it, we would have loved it. Obama sells it. We hate it. Now, maybe politics makes strange bedfellows, but I'd say that worked in favor of people who are against the war there. Because you have institutional opposition brooding here. For whatever reason, okay, whatever it is, it's there. You have people like Rand Paul on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee who actually has some interesting points of view. I can't say I agree with the Tea Party on much of anything, but as a Tea Partier, he raised some interesting points. He was in the committee where he grilled John Kerry, and he said, why are we doing this? Do you think Americans are a little tired of war at this point, and you're going to spend a lot of money on something, and there's going to be a lot of lives lost and more instability, and don't you think we've done enough of this in the last 10 years? And he really put Kerry and the administration on the defensive. Now, you have a public, which, to be honest, there wasn't very much of a public display of dissent. I really didn't see much anywhere in terms of protests. What you did see was something a little different. And I think this is where the historic change comes in. You saw massive numbers of people who were contacting their members of Congress angrily. And there was a lot of reporting about this. People were privately, at least, contacting the members of Congress and saying, hell no. We don't want another war. Reporting from Nancy Cordes from CBS, this is straight out of her news reporting on this, she said, quote, it's difficult to find a way to vote yes for members of Congress when so many of your constituents are opposed, because they were getting all these flood of calls. Especially for House members who get reelected every 2 years and are going to be judged in 2014 based on how they vote on this controversial matter, end quote. And she went further to elaborate. She said, it really depends on the member of Congress. If you were gung-ho in favor of this, public opinion probably didn't matter. If you were a fair weather supporter and you were getting angry calls, maybe there's something there that you're going to start listening to. If you were on the fence and you're getting a lot of angry calls, well, now I have an incentive here to start taking this a little seriously, and it fits with, for Republican candidates and who are going to be running for re-election, their own interests in standing up to Obama, which they've been doing for years and opposing him. And then you have people who are strongly against, and this just reinforced them even more. So we're starting to see something here with this case study where you'd say, was it just the public? No, I don't think you can say that. I think you could say they were one part of it. They came together with the Republican Congress that was already opposed to Obama for their own reasons, and you had these factors coming together. And what happened was you had a president who proposed a war. And the newspaper articles were saying, within the week of him really starting to say that he wanted to do this, and the reporting saying, well, it looks like it's imminent. That was the word they were using, imminent. And then a week later, 2 weeks later, after this huge hoopla in Congress and people writing to their members of Congress, and there were lots of polls on this, and the polls didn't look too good. In fact, people who were paying more attention to the news on this were more opposed. So opposition was growing, according to people who were actually paying attention to, the criticisms, the actual news on this. So you had this opposition very proactive in this case. And the president, within a week or two of basically starting to roll out this campaign, the early stages, comes back and says, remember when I said we were going to have a war? What I really meant was, wouldn't it be great if we didn't have a war? You'd say, pretty sure that's the exact opposite of what you were going to do. And then he does a big speech, and he says, Russia is coming together with the United States, and we've come up with this agreement. We're going to pursue it. They're going to disarm the Syrian government if they have weapons, which they do. And we hope that works, and we'll reassess this later on after we see how it goes. And all of a sudden, public support for Obama skyrockets. People say, oh, we really like now what he's saying, because you completely changed what you were saying. It was something like as much as 3/4 of Americans were just totally opposed. They were opposed to the war. They opposed to even the idea of providing weapons. Any sort of even aerial strikes, not even ground troops. Not even the standard set in Libya was going to be acceptable. You have this moment now in American history where we really do have, if you're someone who's against the war, against wars in general, and you're anti-war, as a progressive, you really have an opportunity here to try and make something of this and build on it. I don't know what's going to happen. Maybe people become complacent, and in the future, there's another war that gets sold. I have my doubts about that, short of a major terrorist attack. If there's another major terrorist attack, then all rules go out the window. The president could probably do whatever he wants. Short of that, I think there are real questions at this point forward how much power the president is going to have in terms of selling people on war and manufacturing consent and support. It will really depend on how active, at least in part, people are. Are people going to be more active? We really haven't had much of a visible anti-war movement in the streets. We have had some encouraging signs in terms of people contacting members of Congress. Will it go beyond that next time? Maybe people would actually be in the streets. Maybe more people would contact their member of Congress. Maybe we'll have the same thing that happened now happens again. What I'm saying is we've started to see something happen here in the last 12 years where there's been a real change in the way presidential rhetoric is used, how effective it is, and people are tired of the fear. People are tired of being fear-mongered to death year after year after year. I really believe that's why the whole color-coded terror thing is now extinct. People bought that for a number of years, the color-coded terror threats. And it's gone now because people get tired of being scared all the time. I think we've entered a different culture in the United States. Maybe it'll change again at some point in the future. We'll move more towards being more submissive. Maybe we won't. Maybe we'll grow more opposed. I think that all depends on where we go from here and what people do. So I guess that's my high notes, ending this optimistically. I would say cautious optimism. We don't know for sure that's going to happen. It could be the opposite. Most of history is the history of people getting manipulated. We could easily go back to that if people don't become more active. But at least there's more prospects today than we've seen in the last decade. Things are trending in a more positive direction relative to what they've been. So that's kind of where the book ends, because that's where we are right now. That's 2013. We've got first time in history. The public has proactively prohibited a military intervention. As far as I can tell, I could be wrong, but I've looked at this for a while now. I can't identify another example of a public that managed to do that prior to a war. So I think that would be at least some reason to be optimistic. And that's, I guess that's the end. That's where we are right now. Let's hope so, yeah.
Okay, Tony, we're going to take, that's the only operative microphone we have today. So Glenn's going to put it up over there so you can enter the Q&A now. So if anybody wants to queue up there and rant on, express your opinions, by all means do it.
Are you gonna move the camera in closer?
A little bit,
over
but yeah. We just want to get the microphone over there so
Right,
people can use it.
Both going at the same time.
Yeah.
Okay, what you've been telling us is really, really wonderful news for most of us. However, it's lousy news for the military-industrial complex, and since their income stream depends upon more wars, it seems to me that they're likely to try to do something to disrupt this beautiful picture. Do you have any thoughts on that subject or related to it?
So I think that's a good point about, and I hope it's loud enough.
Actually,
For these military interventions and spending more and more money, the problem historically was that, I mean, we talk about the Bush and Obama wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, it goes beyond the regular spending in terms of it's just put on credit cards. So obviously you have this huge burden that we have to bear for this high cost of these interventions. Now, it's my understanding, having looked at the numbers pretty recently, that they kind of ebb and flow, and in Obama's first 4 years in office, he spent actually more money on the military than Bush did after 9/11 for the first 4 years. And that's kind of a really fascinating number if you look at it, because Obama was the anti-war president. Yeah, he's the anti-war president. He spends more money on foreign wars. But I think what realistically is going to happen is in the last 40, 50 years, there's always been this range in terms of spending. Sometimes it's as low as the equivalent of today, maybe maybe $600 billion a year, actually. And then it's as much as maybe $900 billion or $1 trillion a year. And it kind of ebbs and flows back and forth, and we've seen some cuts to the military in the last year with the sequester. I mean, my preference, and I think most leftists would be, if there is an ebb and flow, I'd prefer it to be at the lower end, and preferably even lower than that, because, you know, what are we spending this money on even? So I think in the long term, this, and maybe even in the short term, this could pose a potential problem in terms of military spending. I think these things happen incrementally, though. So, you know, the sequester was, what, an 8% cut across the board? And with modern military budgets, you might be talking about a cut from growth. So it's not even necessarily that. So I think the military-industrial complex is going to be with us indefinitely. Hopefully, this trend will mean kind of moving towards limiting it more than having it grow, because that's been the big trend after 9/11, and I think that's something that most people aren't happy about. They would say, you look in surveys. When people are asked about if you want budget cuts, and most people say they do, which program needs to be cut out of the big three? Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, or the military? When you back people into a corner, the first one that comes up is military, out of those three. So I guess we're going to see what happens, but I would agree with you that the potential is there to start seeing a cut here. I mean, there's a lot of popular support for it, and if public opinion is going to matter, then that would, you know, it might have an effect here. We'll see. I guess it's all up in the air, really.
It seems that the next thing after Syria is Iran, and there's been fluctuations in that. It seems to me that right now there is a good deal of opposition to that in this country. On the other hand, what is it in other countries? France just took a rather hardline stand, and Israel certainly, there's efforts to counter any peacenik activities. And so I'm wondering if you looked at some other countries in that, and do they have the same trend or different trends? And how is it working out with Iran at this point that you see?
So a lot of questions about Iran and what are other countries doing. In this book, I didn't look at more than American public opinion, but I can say in terms of having looked at the surveys, internationally, that it's not a popular idea across the board. Maybe it's popular in Israel, and maybe in the United States, at least with the Israeli leaders, it's popular. It doesn't seem like something that anyone's in a hurry to do. If you ask Americans, it's kind of tricky, because the surveys, you'll get a majority support for taking action if it's demonstrated that Iran is definitely developing nuclear weapons, which hasn't been demonstrated yet. If you ask people in that way, people say yes, but if you kind of change the wording and you say, do you support taking military action now? It goes from a strong majority down to like 15%, 20%. So I'd say there's a lot of skepticism about this idea of a short-term conflict where we just get involved with Iran. It really doesn't have much support. If somehow you could, authoritatively demonstrate that Iran had nuclear weapons, maybe that would change, but that doesn't seem like it's going to happen because, I mean, the evidence available to this point suggests that we just keep coming up short. I mean, it's been inspected as a country for a decade now through the IAEA.
In terms of Israel, I don't know this, but it seems as if they can, Netanyahu could do certain things that would cause us to change our view and to go in that direction. Manipulate lies or other things, or start certain events, do certain things that might end up the dog or the tail wagging the dog. And what can we do to counter that?
I mean, I think we can do what we've been doing. People would just remain skeptical, but maybe be more active. That's what I'd like to see. I mean, I wasn't particularly impressed by there not being an anti-war movement in the streets this last time. I mean, there was enough public opposition to pressure the president, but there could have been more, and I think we would need more. I think one of the big concerns that you brought up accurately is that, well, so what happens if Israel just does what it wants? And then the U.S. would be put in a position where they'd have to either support Israel or be seen as not supporting them.
What would they do?
I think that
They don't have the means to make a unilateral attack, and they know that even if they did attack, they wouldn't be able to take out the facilities because they're so far underground, they'd have to use nukes to do it. And even the Israelis wouldn't do that.
Well, success is different than than doing something or talking about it. I wouldn't be successful, as Lauren accurately pointed out, because the facilities are fortified and you're not going to do it. But in the case of the United States, I mean, what's happened so far, from what I've seen in the news, is that the Obama administration has very quietly told them, we don't want to do this right now because we're already dealing with all of this dissent at home. And they've pressured them behind the scenes to not do it. Now, will they do it? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not, but they haven't so far. And apparently the U.S. was able to exert pressure to do that, so it doesn't seem like in the short term that's something that's going to happen.
The question is there anything we can do to counter it, to counter that flow of propaganda which will try to make us do it? I mean, I don't think that the peace community is sufficiently articulate or even aware, and also doesn't have a strategy to counter it. But what, is there any? I think it's a real imminent threat, and we've got to mobilize in some way. I don't know how.
I mean, I think we need more forums like this, but I think the key is that we need to do a much better job of getting young people involved, because it's not exactly related to your point, but it's indirectly related. I teach a class in American government, and I teach a couple hundred students a semester, and the problem is, we just talked about Congress, and I said, okay, the government shut down. This was literally a month ago, or a little bit more than a month ago, and I said, who wants to get us started? What happened here? It's like, well, they know there was a shutdown, they know nothing else. So what we need to be doing in an educational setting is getting young people more interested in politics, because from the research I've seen, if you don't get people interested by their late teens, early 20s, they probably won't be later. That's really the formative years where people realize you're not just going to have an epiphany when you're 40 and realize, wow, I'm an ignorant schmuck. I need to learn about the world. Probably not going to do that from what the research is saying. So we need to do a better job as teachers at getting people more involved, and classes need to do applied learning. I try to do that in my state and local politics class in American government, where I tell people they need to go out and get involved in groups in their community, and teachers just need to do a better job. Frankly, they haven't been. We've seen the evisceration of education in K through 12 with No Child Left Behind, and now it's coming to college. And to be perfectly frank, the state of higher ed before it wasn't that great either, in terms of the lack of critical thought. There's this obsession, and I would call it the cult of objectivity in higher ed, where people have delusionally convinced themselves that they are able to step out of their bodies and be objective and talk as if they don't have feelings and values that drive their research. And that's really been pretty toxic for American youth too, because what you need is teachers who are passionate and care about things and say things that make students interested and get them involved. You don't need a bunch of people who are brain dead, put it frankly, who deliver monotonous lectures to their students, and people fall asleep in class because they're working 2 jobs and they come there and they didn't pay to get bored to death, and they're just going to go to sleep. And that's the big problem we're having, is that we're not doing our job as educators. It's not going to come from the media, as we've learned. It's not going to come from political leaders, so it has to come from forums like this, activists, and it has to come from educators. And hopefully that will happen at some point. All you can really do as individuals is make that part of your responsibility.
We always get at this point. As far as Bibi Netanyahu, the rhetoric is one, and media are one factor, but the main factor is lobbying. Lobbying, money, APEC rules. APEC really has a huge influence on our foreign policy. Okay, that's my opinion. But my question, 2 questions for you. One is, as far as your moral discussion, I'll have to get your book, of course. Do you feel that some of the anti-war sentiment has to do with the trend for introversion into domestic problems, the economy, the employment issue, rather than being a moral awakening? The other one has to do with rhetorics as being effective. I think I don't know how you measured it. You said 2 to 1. If you just measured rhetoric as 1, or did you also discriminate the effectiveness of rhetorics? Okay, for example, I thought that the Bush administration, Bush himself, George W. was much more effective than Obama now, not before the elections. Obama is stammering, doesn't sound authentic. Bush did. He believed his shit. Also, Bush enlisted religion and his zeal. Obviously, he is a zealous. He's now into converting Jews into Christianity. So he was much more effective. Also, he used to say to take two events that are unrelated and say them in the same sentence over and over and over again. Repetition, that's a very known self-hypnotic message. And you made a comment before about maybe some people don't pay attention. Well, that's the best. To listen, to hear something without listening goes into your subconscious, and then you are influenced, but you have no idea why. You don't know. So this is also effective, not paying attention, but it's in the air, you know, you hear it, you smell it. So how did you really, oh, and another thing is with the effectiveness is what is the narrative right now. I mean, when the VA failed the veterans, when the veterans came and showed that they are really not taken care of, is that also not a factor that very powerful, I think, at least the military complex. So how did you discriminate rhetorics from rhetorics?
So that's a good question. How do you measure the effect of presidential rhetoric? Well, most people don't pay close attention to presidential speeches. So what I did was, first I went back and read the speeches. There's one group of people that does pay a lot of attention to speeches, and that's reporters. They're the ones that go to the White House and they hear the rhetoric and they look at the speeches, and then they take cues. So what I did was, first I went back to the speeches and read them and kind of deciphered what was being said. Then I went and did, you know, across every one of these issues, a basic analysis of what were the dominant themes that kept getting hit on over and over in the news. And once you could identify those dominant themes, you'd say, okay, so how did this relate to Americans? And the funny thing about modern surveys is they have these questions. Since we're the most polled country in history, it's kind of nice sometimes if you want to measure this stuff. They ask on all these big issues, how much attention were you paying to the news and this issue? And people either paid more attention or less. And on basically every one of these issues, you could match up the content with the effects in terms of the, you know, people who paid more versus less attention. So you'd find a theme in the speeches, and then you'd verify it in the media, and then you'd look at the public, and then it would be filtered down. So, you know, it's a complicated process. It really is a research project to do these things, but that data is out there. I mean, you can find it. It's pretty much out there. Now, you mentioned something about subliminal messages, and I think there's, I guess it depends on who you're talking about, different people in different groups. I mean, some people, it's like, unless it's, you know, NCIS and The Voice, I don't want to hear a freaking word. And it's like, it's the bubble, right? So I don't know how much of anything gets through to them about politics because they're literally in a hermetically sealed bubble. Then there's another group that I think what you're talking about might be relevant. People who kind of are paying attention in and out, but not really. And that's a really important group of people because, you know, it starts with people who are paying a lot of attention to the news. And then people, this has been shown in public opinion studies, people talk to each other, right? Talk with family and friends, and then a message gets filtered. And that's this really huge group of Americans who are paying some attention, and then when the issue gets really big in the news, they'll start paying a little more attention. And it could be very effective for them, the whole subliminal thing. They're kind of paying attention, but not. And to the extent that they heard anything, they heard this one thing, and then they go for it. So different publics, different impact, I guess, or lack thereof. I don't know if I answered all of your questions. I know you had mentioned a couple things. If there's anything else I missed,
The economy and as part of American introversion.
Yeah, thanks for reminding me. I looked into this about 5 years ago, right when the economic meltdown was happening, and I surveyed, I think at the time I had 250, 300 students. I had them all fill out a survey. Said, do you support or oppose the Iraq War? And they said either support or oppose. I said, for the people who oppose, why? What is the most important reason? And I gave them a potential list, or they could choose other. It was like, too many casualties, immoral, it's all about ulterior motives, the oil, Bush lied, weapons of mass destruction, it's not winnable, costing too much money. That was the big one. That was the most popular reason people were saying that we want this over, because we have all these problems here, unemployment's growing, the economy's collapsing, we want to take our money, we want to put it into something that could actually help people. And that seems to be something that I've seen time and time again with students in the last 4 or 5 years. Really this turn back to more insulation. And really that just reinforces for a lot of people the anti-war feeling. Because why are we spending all this money for that crap? We've got problems with education. People got to spend, you want to go to a state university in Illinois, you got to spend $25,000 a year. But yeah, their own problems to deal with. When I tell students this, their faces get red. They're just extremely angry. It's like, this is BS. They don't know, because they're, you know, these students I'm teaching, I teach a number of different places, but at a community college, they haven't really been hit by that yet. But when you transfer, then you get hit real quick. 25 grand a year. This is what they're dealing with. They're dealing with health insurance changes. You have to have health insurance now. How are you going to pay for it? You're going to be on a parent's plan. Are your parents covering you? Are they not? You got to get covered some other way. Jobs looking pretty bleak, right? We're concerned about that. High cost of education. It's not exactly a great time to be young in America today. It's not. I don't think there's as much optimism as there's been really historically. I mean, for obvious reasons. So yeah, I think that's a big factor you're talking about, that insulation is a rational response to what people are dealing with.
It's hard for me to be quiet. I don't have any questions, just some commentary. The first has to do with the limited role of reason, facts, and logic. It's a pet theme of mine, as you personally know.
Speaking of the microphone.
I want to talk about some, just sort of some commentary, beginning with the fact that those of us who are old enough to have been wizened up by Vietnam, before the war, before the Bush invasion, there were three separate investigations going on in Iraq. Hans Blick, Mohammed Baradi, and I forgot the name of the Marine guy who was
Scott Ritter.
Scott Ritter, who was later arrested on child porn or something like that. But that's besides the point. That if anybody anybody who had depended on anything except mainstream media would know that even though we had sold him weapons of mass destruction to use, or at least poison gas, to use against the Iranians, that there was nothing there. But the point here is that most people really don't pay as much attention to this thing, and this is sort of what you were saying too, but unless it's really kicking you in the ass, which gets to the decline of Bush's popularity. I don't think it's either or, but I think it had much more to do with the fact of the stock market going, plunging in half, and the plants closing and things like that. Okay, this is more of a way of not even asking you to comment, but I think that one of the things that you allude to, which is something that I feel very strongly about, and it gets into my work a lot, is the recent work of a number of, I guess, political psychologists, cognitive psychologists, etc., especially somebody like George Lakoff. I don't know if you know his work, but one of the things that he talks about, and I think is really good here, is on the power of framing. And one of the problems is that you didn't use the words, but when you're under fear, you can sell people any kind of crock of shit because you become the powerful authority. And Bush wanted to go to war, as you mentioned. It's been documented before he was elected. Now we just saw another book come out. He just went there because he wanted to kick some ass. Those were the words that the guy used. And in fact, Afghanistan was too easy. And then Alan Greenspan said a couple months ago, "Of course we went there for oil. What are you doing? Went there for the coconuts or the peanuts or something like that?" So I think that the ability to use these frames, and I think one of the things that we have to admit, and it's a shame on the left, to paraphrase George Lakoff, you know, we're a bunch of people who believe in facts, reason, logic, science, evidence, and things like that. That does not change people's minds, and in fact, when you present facts to them, it makes them more firmly entrenched. And you know, you have to reach people on an emotional level in terms of the fact that most people are not entrenched hawks or entrenched doves, but can go either way on those issues. Last but not least, you know, because I personally think you have to be optimistic to be a leftist. Otherwise, why would you come out on a day like this when you can think of so many other things to do? But start the revolution. I think that you're ending on a proper note. I can't fully analyze why. I'm not sure you can either. But one of the things that we kind of notice is, as lots of young folks, the people that you teach, the people that I teach, are looking forward to a job market that sucks big time. I don't know if anybody read the New York Times today article about the kids in Spain, you know, 57% unemployed, and they're finding jobs in the Netherlands, in Sweden, in Germany, but not in Spain, not in Italy, not in Greece. And when these kids really, you know, they listen to us sometimes, at least for an hour a day, when they see that the F-35, which is the most expensive piece of shit ever built in the history of the world, I mean, I still don't think they're allowed to use them to take, I think they can fly them, not in combat. That's the supersonic stealth fighter bomber. It's an absolute piece of crap. It doesn't work. You know, I think that given the budget problems that we are facing, that there is more and more pressure. So I think that one of the final points I want to make, which is pretty much agreeing with what you're saying from a slightly different point of view, because I do the social movement stuff. It's very easy, and I'll say it myself, that Occupy kind of, you know, faded away and has no influence. But I don't think that it's that easily dismissed, because the way I look at it, I hate to sound like a Marxist, but that's what I am, is that Occupy was a reaction to the contradictions of capital. And the structural conditions that gave rise to Occupy haven't changed. You know, so the good news is the kids are getting jobs as unpaid interns and things like that. But as these kids, as you point out, as they get older and start becoming more politically active and start realizing there's a linkage between the job situation that sucks, the career opportunities that even my daughter was talking to my wife yesterday about how, boy, it's really tough being a millennial. That I think that there will be less and less support for the military. And last but not least, on the Israel thing, the Walt Mearsheimer argument, I think, is really quite blunt. The United States and Israel have had a confluence of influence. Israel can't do anything except tough and puff. Netanyahu, most of his bluster is to maintain internal politics, to keep the right-wing crazies right-wing and crazy. They don't have the military ability to make a major attack on Iran, and they know that the minute their first bomb falls, somewhere between 40 and 100,000 bombs come from, or missiles are launched by Hamas. There was just an article, I think it was in today's New York Times, about the Israeli general, Halevi, I think his name is, who's the head of the Northern Front, who's basically saying that this will not be a cakewalk or something like that.
It comes from Iran, not Hamas.
No. Hezbollah has about 100. Yeah, Hezbollah is basically controlled in large part by Iran. That the Israeli military is against it. I think that Netanyahu is basically trying to keep his weakening, not gone, weakening coalition together. We saw what happened in the last election, where the young people that had demonstrated over cottage cheese did not vote for. They didn't vote for the left, but they did vote for Lapid and the cottage cheese revolution and things like that. So now, I don't know if you were driving or something like that, but it's been all over the news the last 2 days. It looks like around the 2021st there's going to be an agreement formally reached in terms of Iran that they're probably going to stop. They're going to stop construction on the Iraq plant. They've already reduced a lot of their production of the uranium. And it's very simple. Again, I don't think you need to be a nuclear physicist to figure this out. They have about $180 billion of their money is locked up in Western banks that they can't touch. Their nuclear plant cost them $40 billion, their nuclear program. Their economy sucks, and Rouhani told Khatami we are bankrupt, the pantry is bare, and they have the choice. Now, whatever we think of these people, and I don't particularly like fundamentalists of any stripe, they're not smart. They're not dumb people. They're very smart. And they know what happened in 2009 when they lost the election and they were able to stop it. They looked out and see what happens all over Arab Spring. If they start, if the things continue, they are going to be overthrown, and they know that. And so I think that what they want to do is ease up, because they would much rather stay in power without bombs than have massive protest over it. We'll see what happens, but I'm pretty sure that there will be a resolution, and 2 years from now we'll all be taking these low-budget trips to Tehran.
Thanks. I don't know if there's anything specifically you wanted me to comment on.
No.
You made a lot of good points.
As I said, these weren't questions, these were just
Yeah.
basically supplementary commentary, sort of going in a slightly different direction.
Yeah, so the only thing I would say is at the beginning what you were talking about framing, I mentioned like social construction, and it kind of plays into the whole thing I was talking about where political scientists say, oh, there are facts that we recognize and problems and we deal with them, and really it's more about narratives and framing, and yeah, so I would agree.
One of the great problems, that I can't believe it, is that this crock of shit that we call rational choice theory, we got rid of it in sociology years ago, and the only people that wanted to pick that shit up off the floor were the political scientists.
Well, rational choice theory, if you're a layperson, it'll hurt your brain for us to even talk about it, so I would recommend getting into it now. It's just more gobbledygook academic jargon. But
yeah, there's so many interesting points you brought up and other people have. We could just go on for hours, but unfortunately we don't have that. I'm going to lay out a couple of quick points and invite you to comment on it. First of all, I do have one quarrel with something you said. You're feeding the beast, the Republican ideologues who have convinced not only the Republicans, but it seems most Democrats, or a lot of Democrats, that the budget problems we have in the United States are a spending problem and not a revenue problem. This is totally ridiculous. Yes, we probably spend some money on things we shouldn't be spending on, maybe some military things, maybe some other things. Nonetheless, the resources are out there if we would simply reform our tax system and make it sane and more just and more practical than it is now. What you said something to the effect of, should we cut Medicare, Medicaid, or should we cut military? This kind of implies that the Republicans are right, that we don't have enough money to do all the things we need to do, so we've got to cut something. And I think this is ridiculous, and the Republicans have unfortunately got a lot of people believing it, as I said, even Democrats. Second point, regarding, I wish you'd comment on that in a minute, regarding polls. Now, I'm taking this from memory, but I believe before we went into Iraq, which was way back when, 2003, I guess, there were polls taken, and roughly 1/3 of the people were against going into Iraq in any case, 1/3 wanted to in any case, and 1/3 didn't want to unless the United Nations backed us. The United Nations never backed going into Iraq at that time. Nonetheless, the day after we attacked, the polls switched to 2/3 in favor and 1/3 against. The American people kind of back any action, especially, well, if we're at war, we've got to support our country, which, if I were Canadian, that would worry me a little bit, because if things get bad enough for the President and the White House, one way to increase his poll numbers would be, to attack Canada. Why are we attacking Canada? Well, who knows, but we attack Canada. We got to get behind the President on this. So that's one of the things. Another thing, I think one of the reasons that we are backing off militarily is, frankly, we have a very weak military now, except for the fact that we can annihilate the entire planet in less than an hour with our nuclear weapons. Other than that, we have a very weak military, and I think this is a bad thing, even though I think doves like that, because if you don't have a strong enough military, you can't go out and make war. But nonetheless, the case could come up where we would really need to have a stronger military, and we don't have it. Thank you.
So there were 2 points. One was about the last point you were talking about. Well, actually, it kind of relates to the first part, right? It's the budget cuts and spending.
Budget, yeah.
So I disagree with vehemently with the Republican Party that, you know, with that narrative you were describing. I mean, when I say cuts to military spending, in terms of my support, that would relate to all of the unfunded wars, which I would like to see end. And I haven't figured out yet, I know this has been brought up for a long time by critics, why we need military bases in Germany and Japan and so on. And so, you know, in terms of unnecessary military bases and unnecessary wars, I would like to see those things cut. I don't have a problem with significant spending on military to keep people safe in terms of having troops ready to protect people, or if there's an emergency or crisis, or whether it's natural or man-made or whatever it is. But to the extent that I support budget cuts, it has to do with those specific things, not cutting Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security. In fact, well, I've been arguing for a long time, I tell this to my students, even on traditional kind of Keynesian grounds, we need more intervention. We need more government spending for things like education and healthcare and all types of programs, and that would help the economy.
Infrastructure.
Right, infrastructure redevelopment, and really, government's going to have to do that. So, specific budget cuts maybe, but in general, I would like to see the government be more active. This has been a big problem in the States. We just don't value education anymore, and the budgets have been totally cut to shreds for education, and it got outsourced to student tuition. We need to value things again, like infrastructure, and one of those things is education, and we're not doing that. The other thing you had brought up, you were talking about Iraq, and you know, it seemed like support really didn't go up till right when we went to war. The data I show in my book, that is true, the support did skyrocket right as it was happening, but it was actually a 3-month in the making thing. If you look at time series data, the support, it kind of went up in September of 2002 when Bush started rolling out the campaign. And then it started going down by October to December. Democrats started pushing back. Then by January to March, it started going up again. So there were probably 3 things at least that really played into building support for that war. One was the shock of 9/11 and people thinking, for some crazy reason, that they were tied to Al-Qaeda. We know why. The other would have to do with, well, it's the shock of 9/11, it's the presidential rhetoric itself, and then troops in harm's way. So that's one big part of it you're talking about, but I think there's other parts too. The rhetoric's a big part because you can see the growth in support as far back as January, really. It's kind of a long-term process that really spiked at the end there as you're talking about. If you're interested, take a look at the chapter 1 in the book, because it looks at the data very specifically.
Hi, Tony. I'm interested in looking at, we're talking about how optimistic we are that, the drumming up support for war in Syria became a failure because the rhetoric, obviously, it didn't have the same impact on the population. And I'm wondering if the failure of this Syrian rhetoric in order to drum up war, is that going to have a drastic change in how maybe presidents in the future are going to try to get the public to support their military conflicts? Are they going to change tactics?
I think Obama realized probably too late his mistake that maybe you should build support before you roll out your campaign. So that's probably the most important thing that'll change, and then it's really a toss-up. This is why I was saying I don't know. I'm cautiously optimistic because, without the staunch congressional opposition, how far does the public opinion go? Maybe it goes the opposite, which was what I was predicting originally, that, okay, Congress gets on board, and then the media gets on board because they just go talk to people in Congress and the White House, and then everybody's hearing the same thing, and how much support can you drum up? You might get, if a third of Americans supported this thing, you might get 10, 15, 20% support just from controlling the agenda alone. Then you're up to 35, 40%. Then we go to war, right? And then it's the whole rally behind the flag. Now you got up to 55, 60%. That could have happened. So public opposition by itself, I don't know. I don't know for sure. It's always hard to deal with counterfactuals, right? But in terms of the question you asked, I think the big thing that'll happen is you'll be more careful next time, and presidents will be, that you can't just take it as assumed that you're going to do what you want. You have to actually really make a case, and I think he really took that for granted. It'll probably be a big change in the future.
In terms of going beyond people who are in this room and similar places, and trying to make some dent in large portions of the population. I think we've got the problem, I think, in evolutionary psychology and territorialism. I think that, you know, people, and this is my view, I think there are a lot of authoritarian personalities on one side and non-authoritarian on the other. And I think authoritarian personalities are threatened, they're fearful basically, and they want to ensure their own survival or their own territory and so on. And if you attack that directly, you're going to get the opposite effect. They'll get even more scared. You somehow either subliminally, or you've got to improve their mental health, or you've got to do something so that you won't drive them into even further opposition. And I don't know if people are working on that as to how to accomplish that. And just people in general have territorial imperatives and their own group, tribalism. How do we get people beyond that, and especially the authoritarians among us, but all of us? I mean, I hope people will focus on that or we'll never get anywhere, I think.
So dealing with authoritarian personalities, I mean, I've looked at a lot of the public opinion data on that, and you know, you are right. The further you go towards the conservative to reactionary right, the less likely people are to be tolerant of other people's religions, the more likely they are to say that you should ban books you don't like. All types of measures, they become more likely to be authoritarian. That is something more often associated with right-wing politics today. There's no question about that if you look at surveys. People say it themselves. The question would be how you would deal with that. It's hard to deal with because, like, for example, if I'm teaching a class and you've got people who are authoritarians and they're trying to intimidate other people, how do you come to a meeting of the minds with somebody who's trying to use you as an instrument? That's been historically the problem with right-wing media. It's used as a medium to bully people and tell them to shut up and yell at people and demoralize them. So at some point, I believe, you know, in the classroom we need to be respectful to each other and openly consider different points of view, but there really isn't any place for people who are going to bully other people. So how many people actually do that? It seems like it's a relatively small number of students that I run into in terms of young generation.
Who are authoritarian, you mean?
Well, they have that kind of open behavior where they're just not going to listen to other people and they're not going to consider points of view and they're going to really try and bully people. And I guess that's the good news. A lot of people might share those things privately, and I think that's kind of the goal, to set a standard of discourse where people understand that that's not acceptable. I guess just being intolerant of intolerance is, I guess if you want to say it generically.
I think the farther you move from the classroom and into actual people who are contending in politics, you'll find more people like that.
Yes.
Who are unwilling to be open. And there's lots of examples of it. And they herald it as being good.
Yeah, but they're a declining proportion of the population.
What?
They're a declining population, though.
I mean, what I think of outside of the classroom most prominently would
Yes,
be
maybe.
Well, that's what I mean.
right-wing media, particularly, and then the people who follow those. It's a very specific subgroup of Americans who, their idea of a good Thanksgiving is screaming at each other about politics. Thankfully, I would agree with Lauren, I think that is a declining demographic. A lot of that whole nasty forum of discussion is really, there's a saying amongst people on right-wing radio, you know, they're not making new Rush Limbaugh listeners. They do, there are young people who are forced to listen to it because their parents drive in the car and they've got them captive.
Oh.
And they tell me about it, but from what I've seen from younger generations is that that's just something that turns people off. I mean, even people who, that's their parents. It's like they see in the classroom that they could have a whole different type of discourse. And they're just not interested in that. I'm right, and here, let me tell you all the ways I'm right and why you're a pinhead or something, as Bill O'Reilly says. So I think that is a very common thing, but I do think it's declining, which is good news.
It's because of sex and drugs and rock and roll.
Because what?
The anger of...
No, that the anger dissipates.
Yeah. And
With pleasure,
what's the
principle.
other term that demographic researchers use, generational replacement. When
Go hard for it.
people who die pass on and then new people replace them. They're not, they're not making new Limbaugh viewers, right, or listeners.
Carl Mannheim's argument.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Cloning.
I think one thing which was far from radar was Honduras. I think Obama fulfilled his promise of restoring what he called restoring American leadership, which is the return of the coups and the death squads and the thing which was a little bit outmoded by the time he came in. He was very successful in that first thing, which was the coup in Honduras, and it was fast, it was easy, so American public went for it, and it's still going on. The expansion is expanding the death squads and the killing of the labor unionists, the activists, and so on, as you see every day is getting worse. And other places, they're starting reburgeoning again. In Guatemala, that squads are coming up. So he's been very successful in that respect. You can't deny that. And Libya, they destroyed a whole civilization. The guy with 30 years tried to make a country out of a tribal backward thing. So they totally destroyed it. What else do you want? So it's still fighting. Yesterday there were 100 people, hundreds were injured, and 30 or 40 were killed. And that's how it is. It's fine for the ones who want to destroy this kind of thing. It's like independent, secular countries in the Middle East. They want to destroy. Secondly, is I want to take issue with your statement that there are occasions that there are humanitarian intervention. I want to quote unquote. There is no such thing. It's always been, put it aside, forget about it. There's no such thing. There's only either been a futile or totally harmful. There's never been a benevolent imperial intervention anywhere in the world ever. So one thing, it should be internalized in the minds of the educators. They have to be educated themselves that there is nothing come good out of imperialism. The concept of imperialism should be internalized. Otherwise, there's a chance of again and again, when they come with a new scam, the people might fall for it again and again and again. So don't be so optimistic that it might, if this next one, if they come up with a good plan, there are people who are getting six-figure salaries. Their job is to create consent. They create hoax. And they lose their jobs if they're not able to do it. Otto Rice fell from grace because he couldn't handle the coup in Honduras, in Venezuela. So these people have to create this kind of thing, and they have to, so be aware of that. These people that are being paid. The third thing is the access to internet. So in this time and age, if you want to know something from now or the past or the future, it's available on the internet. You can get it. Unless you don't want to know it, which is lots of people say, I don't know, I don't want to know, and I'm proud of it. Unless you say that, you can find it. And that's why they're cracking down on internet. This TPP is a major part of it is towards restricting the access to internet for the people. They're cracking down on the people who might come out, and the whistleblowers. They're coming out against all that severely. Why are they doing this? Why are they spending one of the expenses, major expenses that should be addressed to is the expenditure for the intelligence and the building of this huge internationally directed intelligence gathering. Why are they doing it? They're afraid of us. They're afraid of the propagation of intelligence. So I want you to comment on that.
Okay, so a lot of good points there. I think the first point is really good because you're talking about coups, and that kind of circumvents the whole presidential rhetoric thing, right? Because you do it quietly. So there's all types of presidential power. The terms I've heard social scientists use, there's this idea of power with persuasion, which is what I'm talking about, right? And power without persuasion. You just do what you want with the iron fist of the military and the CIA. So the problem with that stuff is that we don't even know until later. So you have, you know, sometimes it comes out right away, like in Venezuela in the early 2000s. And we find out that the U.S. had this involvement with the National Endowment, what was it, the USAID. And then sometimes it takes years and decades to get the information. So this is one of those things where it's really degrading to a free society, and it's obvious why it was secret, because nobody would have supported it. They knew you're just overthrowing democratically elected leaders. And it's something that is really hard to deal with when you have that kind of secrecy. In terms of what you were saying about intervention, I agree with you. I don't think there's ever been a humanitarian intervention. So when I was talking about humanitarianism, I think that was incidental. I don't think it had anything to do with the intervention motivation. I think they had a reason to intervene. This gave them a convenient time to do it within this very specific time. And I think you can look at other countries and other places where, okay, if you cared about humans, then why, when the Muslim Brotherhood was overthrown in Egypt, did you just sit there when hundreds, like more than 500 people got killed? Why did they do that? Why did they sit there, the Obama administration, not just sit there, but they're giving these people aid, right? In Egypt and Bahrain, and they're giving money to Saudi Arabia, and there's an uprising there in Bahrain, and they're putting it down at the same time that they're fighting for the rebels in Libya. This is just too ridiculous. I think it was coincidental. I think, okay, some people didn't get killed by Gaddafi. You can point out that, oh, look at how great this thing was, but it really had nothing to do with what the motivation was. So, you know, it might have been an unintended consequence or have something on some secondary level. It had nothing to do with the motivation. But then you use it rhetorically, right? And that's how rhetoric works. So I don't think I disagree with what you're saying. If you were to look back in 2011, so I wrote about this. I was pointing these same things out. This has nothing to do with humanitarian intervention. I was being pretty critical of it. Talking about oil and the things we were talking about in here. So I think that that's a good point you're making. In terms of the internet stuff, I think it's a good point too. The information's out there, but part of the problem is helping young people and people who are potentially interested know where to look. Because there's also a lot of crap out there. I mean, all the worst kind of conspiracy theories get spread online. Obama the birther, Bush is a shape-shifting lizard. Right?
No, Obama's the shape-shifting.
Well, now him too, maybe.
And from another planet coming to harvest us for
Birds of
protein.
a feather.
Death Panels comes from Facebook, right? Sarah Palin's Facebook page. So
No,
we have
that
to have-
panel came from Frank Luntz. That was his
yeah, and then she disseminates it, right? And then, so we got to be very careful that we give people the tools to evaluate information properly and know what is a legitimate piece of information from something that's just total ridiculousness. And a lot of people apparently don't know how to do that because the whole birther thing, you know, chain emails, that's where that was going. And then it got picked up in the media, and political leaders picked it up. And apparently half of Americans were falling into this stuff. Death panels, birtherism, Obama the socialist. Whatever you think about Obama, he's not a socialist. So we got to be careful with internet information. The information is there, but there's also massive amounts of crap. So we have to know how to tame the information, get stuff that's useful.
Look, it appears, garbage appears on democracy now, about Syria, about Libya. There is full-fledged support for the so-called rebellion or revolution over that. You can see that. This is a source money working.
Yeah. Bad information all around.
Thanks for your talk, Anthony. I want to bring up a completely different subject, and I'd like you to comment on it if you find a way. You spoke early of how to treat 9/11, but 9/11 wasn't treated as a law and order issue. And I get to do a lot of casual history lecturing, and in every century there's a major event that is a homicide that's not treated like a homicide. And in the 19th century, in this country, it was the Haymarket Affair, And for us in the 20th century, it was the assassination of JFK, and in the 21st century, it was 9/11. And you'll notice that nobody speaks of these as homicides, even though the Haymarket riot was treated a little bit as a homicide. But if you talk to people like police detectives who work on homicides, particularly over the long term, the thing about homicides is that over the course of time, there's usually a convergence as to who was the perpetrator. But these political murders that I spoke of, these 3 incidents, were highly political, and there's been a divergence of agreement as to who were the perpetrators over the course of time. And that's very significant, because these events' significance aren't as homicides, and what's really important is not who is the perpetrator. The importance is how the state and society respond to these incidents, because these incidents have, the response to these incidents have tremendous ramifications, whereas the true identity of the perpetrators is over the course of time, absolutely irrelevant. There were 2 deathbed confessions as to who threw the bomb in the Haymarket riot. And I'm sure there's only a minority of people who believe that Oswald, who was a CIA asset, was the lone gunman who shot President Kennedy. There's a reason that Kennedy was killed, and there's a reason that anarchy was put on trial in the Haymarket affair. And eventually, when we find out there was a reason that 9/11 happened, and there's actually, without going into the conspiracy, there's a lot of unanswered questions about 9/11. But one of the questions that is answered is that the Patriot Act was a piece of legislation that was on the shelf, and the powers that be were just waiting for the opportunity to roll it out, which they did. It was a 1,000-page piece of legislation that was passed overnight. I don't think it takes a genius to see that there's a problem there. And I'd like you to comment on that notion, on what I've said, to the degree that you might or might not.
So just in terms of whether we should be looking at some of these things more as law and order issues, is that that's the main thing?
Well, yeah. Whatever. Well, like I say, whatever you want to say. My point is that there's a reason these weren't looked at as law and order issues, and historically their significance is not as law and order issues. But no one views them as law and order issues, and no one talks about 9/11 as a homicide. No one was charged with homicide for 9/11.
Yeah. Well, it's, like people have always said, if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So we have a huge military, and we want to bomb people. And I don't agree with it philosophically. I mean, that's why we're here. I think it's interesting because a lot of it just has to do with hypocrisy. If you look at the way that other terrorist incidents in other countries are framed in the U.S. media, and there's been research on this, those are framed as law and order issues, but not when it's us. Then it's war, damn it, let's roll, right? So I don't think we are very good at being consistent. It should have been, as far as I'm concerned, a law and order issue, because you have people who perpetrated a crime and they need to be captured and evidence needs to be presented. And clearly the way we did it did nothing to address that. People just dispersed from Afghanistan and into other surrounding areas, Pakistan and Waziristan and so on. And I think that would be a better way of looking at it. If we have that standard for other people, we should have it for ourselves. The problem is just psychologically there's that mentality of we have this hammer and let's use it, right? And it's not exactly the best way to conduct yourself internationally. It's a very blunt policy. And obviously people recognize this because America isn't very liked. So,
Very what?
Liked.
Isn't very liked in terms of foreign policy. People, whether it's the Obama administration or Bush, they don't do so well in international public opinion polls, and people would like us to join the world community rather than spit in the face of it.
It's also national pride. Even Bush, when people spoke about let's leave, let's get out of Iraq, nothing, there's no reason we'll be there. He said, yes, we have to keep faith. What would be the image of United States if we just
keep face for right-wing military hawks. I mean, internationally, you don't have any face left to speak of because people think it's just terrible. You don't have to equate nationalistic pride with calling certain countries old Europe because they won't do what you tell them to. I mean, you can have nationalistic pride exist independently of spitting in people's faces, and I think that's the part there. That's, oh, save face for who? One very select group of political elites in the United States who like this idea of smacking people with the rolled up newspaper on the head every 5 seconds to send a message.
Hey, I'm not an advocate of it. I think that that concept has no room whatsoever. There is nothing like should be national pride. Part of what? But it is an emotional appeal for people to reach out to show that the U.S. is always on top and is always number one.
Especially if they're afraid, right? After 9/11.
It's called American exceptionalism.
Fear is a powerful weapon, and there's only one thing more dangerous than the power of fear. The power of fear exercised against people who don't know anything. So if you have people who are very depoliticized and then angry, that's the best of all worlds as a political leader. People who are dumb and scared will do almost anything you tell them, because they don't know any better. So that's why 9/11 was, I mean, there were really all types of reforms that were institutionalized after that that really dismantled what democracy we have left. You talk about especially civil liberties and privacy. I mean, and it was done in the name of patriotism. So I definitely see what you're saying. You know, it's not that you're agreeing with it, but it is a powerful factor. That's a good point.
In distinction to what Lauren said, when it comes to facts, I think it was Lauren, there's two sources on the internet that the militarism of the last 11 plus years is absolutely no secret, and you only have to go to there's the neoconservative think tank was called Project for the New American Century, and in 2000 they put on the they had the gall to put on the internet their plan, and it's a very simple, obvious plan. You can go onto the internet and you can read it. Unfortunately, they redacted part of the plan, but there's a summary of the redacted plan at Information Clearinghouse. Now, the redacted part of the plan you could find somewhere else. There's a blog article by a man whose name I forget. It's Rense.com. It's like the word rinse, RENSE.com. And he's put out a report on the redacted portions. It's very simple. Well, it's not simple. The Project for the New American Century issued a bunch of recommendations in terms of strengthening the military and dominating cyberspace and outer space, and they recommended invading 6 countries. And those countries were Iraq, Iran, Syria, Afghanistan, Sudan, and Libya. And it's not an accident that 5 out of those 6 countries are the biggest practitioners of resource nationalism in the world. I wouldn't exactly call it socialism, but these countries use their oil revenues to improve things for many groups within their country and improve the lives of many people within their country, and they didn't allow they put limits on Western corporations and how they could act within their country's borders. And the other element to that, to these 6 countries' invasion, is a redrawn map of the Middle East. Without getting into too much detail, the plan is to abandon Israel because they might be too concerned with their own interests. And the new launching pad in the Middle East will be the new free Kurdistan, which will involve, after the invasion of these 6 countries, will involve the removal of the oil-producing areas of Iraq, Iran, the little small area in Syria, and making it part of the new quote-unquote free Kurdistan. And you can go on the internet and you can see these. You can see this material. It's not, I wouldn't call it conspiracy theorist, except in the way that it's put out by conspiracy theorists who seem to have tipped their hand in terms of the military and foreign policy action of the government over the last 13 years, both Democratic and Republican. And it's there for all to see if you want to bother to look at it. So with that, I'll conclude my comments. Pardon me?
The Yemen, YINOM, is all over the internet. This part of thing, Afghanistan, Baluchistan, independent Baluchistan, independent Kurdistan. This is all there, you know. The plan, the map is there.
Right. There's another element, but I'll leave that for another time.
So the PNAC stuff, I mean, anybody who studied the Iraq War and the War on Terrorism is probably familiar with that. And obviously, you know, you had an administration that had an agenda for a long time prior to 9/11, they wanted to go into Iraq, and they had those other countries they wanted to attack. And so that's a good point you're bringing up. But I mean, I would say why stop there? You can go back to the 1940s and 50s and find declassified records talking about concern with resource nationalism and nationalistic regimes that don't do what we want. We want people to sell, you know, resources at cheap rates for us to exploit. So I would say, you know, that history is all of modern history, really. You can find presidential documents that, you know, and even more official than PNAC, which is a bunch of people out of power. Go look at the people who are in power, and they even say it too. So yeah, I think it even goes deeper than that too.
I didn't see any objection to the Norwegian resource nationalism, but I guess they're white folks.
Can I speak now?
Yes.
This is going to be the last comment, and I'm going to conclude with sort of like a question. I'm going to bounce it back to you for final remarks, if you will. Something that you said at the conclusion of your presentation about, with regards to what you saw happening.
May I have your attention, please? The time is now 4:30. The library will be closing in 30 minutes. At this time, internet service is ended for the day. Thank you.
You know, you had mentioned that people were getting tired of fear, and we're seeing some real change coming as a consequence. Well, right before, this is early in September, I went down to the demonstration that was called for right after Obama had announced his intentions about, you know, bombing Syria, and there was this is a Saturday afternoon, right down at we've all been there for dozens upon dozens, if not hundreds of demonstrations over the decades, and I'm looking at a audience, a crowd of maybe something south of 200 people. And I'm thinking on my way down there, like, this is a critical moment, potentially, in American history. Because where is this all headed? I mean, frankly, I was a lot more, probably, and I'm not like a paranoid thinker, at least I don't think of myself like this, but I was concerned about, like, well, where might this end, you know? I mean, the potential for World War III was literally staring us in the face. But yet, you know, we see what happened as a consequence of this massive outpouring of Americans, like, contacting their congressman. This is a Marxist talking here now, you know. So you know about how much confidence I have in reformism and working with these bourgeois politicians. But the remarkable thing about that was, though, I mean, so the paradox in this, you know, here we are, there's this demonstration and nobody came. Potentially, it's like the world may be coming to an end, and yet everybody is like, you know, calling up their congressman or whatnot. So something is going on here. Just as you said, you know, I don't know quite what it is. I think part of the problem is, and the left needs to maybe look in the mirror on this one, because we had just before we did this program, we had a couple Syrians here. And I was like dumbfounded by the number of people who I thought I knew. But we're basically all about, you know, it was the bomb Iran. It was like leftist for imperialism. I was, just what you've been alluding to here in this discussion all day today, I was literally in a state of shock. This is like what it's come down to. Well, perhaps part of what explains, I think, why there's another impetus coming on here is people have seen this for what it is, and they're saying, like, this left, they're leading this. They're not leading me, because I don't buy into this, you know. I think a lot of people are at that point right now. And I'm optimistic, but I'm pessimistic. Like I say, this is a paradoxical situation. I think we're confronted with one of these moments in our history. And where it's all headed and where it's going to go, who knows. But I'd like you for maybe just to like kind of conclude your remarks and maybe amplify on what I'm ranting about here, so I'll let it go at that. Thank you very much.
It's a good point, and it is paradoxical, because how can you have so much protest and nobody protesting? So I've been trying to make heads or tails of that, because traditionally when you think about protest, you think about large numbers of people who actually do go out. So in the case of Vietnam War and then the Iraq War at the beginning, right? You know, I was at those protests in D.C. with
Three-quarters of a million people.
We don't know how many exactly, but yeah, hundreds of thousands of people, and this is just really strange compared to that. I have, I guess, maybe some speculation, because I don't think I figured it out either, but how much of it has to do with kind of the limited nature of the Obama interventions, where, oh, we're just going to do this little bit and then we'll be gone, and then NATO will do it with Libya, or in the case of Syria, there won't be any ground troops, right? So how much of that is just kind of quieting the issue down, and how much of it is just this kind of neoliberal culture we live in today where everything needs to be done through Facebook and whether you like something. So I can make a call, sure, but don't expect me to talk to people in person. My suspicion is that this is playing into people's behavior in modern times with politics, that you've just got all these people who... I talked about this with the Tea Party thing, right? Everyone was a Tea Partier, but nobody was doing anything. I like it on Facebook. Or, you know, I went out and voted for a Tea Partier, but you wouldn't really... I mean, you see the national numbers said something like a couple 100,000 people throughout the whole country were registered Tea Party members, which is pretty pathetic when, it was like... It's supposed to be 15 million people said they were active, and there was only a couple 100,000 people who were actually registered Tea Party members. So... it just seems to be this weird thing going on with modern politics where we can just skip doing things. We can simulate doing them. So I'll make a phone call, and I'll like it on Facebook, and I'll post a message. And it seems to me we've really kind of got to get beyond that, because it's not a replacement for doing things. It's a supplement to it. I mean, I think everybody here knows for OUL that it's a great thing to have this online and people see it, but it's not a substitute for people being more active. So I think we're kind of stuck in that funk right now with everyone, the technological revolution. It's a great thing potentially, but it can be really abused if people withdraw from social relations. I would suspect that's a part of this.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Everybody for coming out.